Hey, what's up, Last in Line Nation? Hey, welcome to another episode and a new series for the hot summer. We're gonna start a series called "Conquer Your Enemy," and I've brought a great guest with a remarkable career and a journey of pouring into young people and discipling and building and coaching. And so, let me introduce you to Mikado Hinson. So Mikado's in his 8th season as the director of player development for Texas A&M University football. And Mikado's got a great journey. Started out here in Houston, Texas, back in 1998 with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And he also served with the University of Houston as their football team chaplain and character development coach, and did that for 14 years. Became a team chaplain for the Houston Rockets as well. Was ordained and licensed minister in 2005, and then served on the FCA National Chaplains Task Force from 2010 to 2013. He's married with 3 children and doing some great things up in College Station, Texas for the University of Texas A&M. And so I would like to welcome formally Mikado Hinson to the show.
John, thanks so much, man. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And hopefully our conversation is helpful to those who are going to listen.
Yeah, man, I can't wait to dive into conquering our enemy. And audience, as you know, but for those of you who are new to the channel, this is a, faith-based servant leadership platform. And we come right out of the Bible in Mark 9:35, where he says, to be first, one must be last of all and servant of all. And Mikado has spent his professional life serving universities, serving Christian athletes, and continues to do so. And so is there anything else about you personally that, if we're going to invite the audience in to be part of this family today, how can they connect with you a little better? What's another thing about you?
Well, I tell you what, I wish there was some huge thing saying, oh, I'm a great opera singer, or I'm really fast, or a whole bunch of different things that would just be very spectacular. And you go, wow, I would have never guessed, one, that this big guy be real fast. I'm not, or could sing like Pavarotti. I can't. But I think I'm kind of just a normal, basic guy. But a lot of hobbies that I have. One of the main hobbies I have is I like doing boxing and ring announcing on the side. And so I like to climb through the ropes and not take the punches, and be able to announce the fight. So it's literally the Bruce Buffer. Now listen, I'm not on that level, but you got Bruce Buffer, Michael Buffer, some of the great ring announcers in combat sports. Well, I'm kind of on the front end of those things, doing local shows in Houston, Bryan College Station, things like that. But I'm the guy who climbs in the ropes and says, ladies and gentlemen, in the red corner, that kind of deal. And but boxing's my favorite sport, so it kind of gets me up close and personal with all the action. So that's kind of just a little bit of something that people may not know about me.
Yeah, that's good. I think I'm a little bit like that as well. We got to unplug, and sometimes we got to, we can't be on all the time. But, man, I'm glad you joined us today because, I feel like your experience is relevant for what we're trying to talk about today. And the conquering our enemy, the N.M.E, being the narrative, the masculinity, and the elevation. So at the surface level, some folks might look at this and go, what do those have to do with each other? Well, we're going to unpack some of that. And we talk about narrative, and we talk about cultural narratives that, really what it is an ongoing storyline that certain external forces might be trying to force us into or try to tell us about ourselves or about the situation. And we really, the point of this is to really get back to baseline and try to understand what God says about it and the narrative he tells about our lives and who we are. So, some of those false personal narratives that we go through, but, I want to get your personal take on some of this and, just how is your life? If we're talking about Mikado Hinson's life and a narrative that maybe you have bought into along your journey, and then you had to kind of snap yourself out of it and come back to the center of what God says, and share your story a little bit along that line and how maybe it was affected by kind of others or external forces.
Yeah. So, when you're talking about your narrative of your life, I think one of the main characters in a narrative is a narrator, and who is speaking, who is the one who's that voice narrating the narrative of a life. Well, for the first 18 years of my life, I kind of was I had no true north. I was kind of just blowing and going to every different direction. I didn't have a spiritual foundation in my life. And so the narrative that I had in my life was being a good person, was doing a lot of good works, and but I really had no moral compass. I had no spiritual foundation in my life. And so the narrative of my life there was just, it was all surface and it was no substance. But when I came to Christ, my freshman year of college, my narrative changed. Now, I was still helping, I was still having to uproot a lot of those things of my former life, even though they were dead. I still needed to weed them out of my garden, so to speak. And so my narrative slowly started changing when I gave my life to the Lord. I started to learn how to listen to the voice of God, really through his word, through fellowship with other believers, being plugged into a local church, growing as a disciple of Christ. And I don't want to get into the Christianese of talk, but really growing as an obedient, committed follower of him. And so my narrative became that. Now, I will say this, that when I gave my life to Christ my freshman year of college, I can't say it's just been a constant growth trajectory. There have been mountains and there's been valleys, and there's been times when I felt like I wasn't hearing the Lord. There were times where I fell away and had to repent and come back to God. And so I think the main thing with any narrative is you got to see who's the one speaking, who's the one telling that story. The enemy is really good at whispering in our ear, telling us what we should do and telling us who we are and who we are not. But God is even greater, and being able to affirm of who we are in him, how he declares us righteous, things like that. But if we got to be careful of the voice that we're listening to. And so, John, in my own personal narrative, my nature, okay, I'm just going to put it out there. Maybe it's helpful to someone. My nature is I'm a people pleaser. And so my narrative was always connected to how others felt, whether it be about me, about the job I was doing, the message I just spoke. And so my nature is never to rock the boat. Now, I've had to grow in those areas, and I've had to die to a lot of those things. Yeah. But I'm a peacemaker by nature. I'm a people pleaser. And sometimes that is detrimental to my spiritual growth. And my narrative is now contingent upon how other people feel about me. And sometimes not sometimes, all the time, I need to be 100% focused and concerned about how God feels about me. When I live my life in that space and my narrative is controlled by the Holy Spirit and God's voice in my life, well, some people are going to, they'll appreciate that, and some people won't. But I can't live my life. It's like a metronome. God has a beat that he wants us to live in and walk in. And when I start living to please people, when I start getting outside of his narrative for my life, I start marching to a different beat. And God has a constant beat in my life, in our lives, that he wants us to operate and walk in. But when we start being that people pleaser, when we start listening to that other voice, that other narrator, the other narrative for our life, then we get off the path and we stray away and we veer away. I've done that in my life. I'd venture to say that people who are listening to this podcast have done it as well. But I've got good news, is that God allows U-turns.
Yeah.
And he allows us to get back on course and in line with him, because obviously we're only going to fulfill his plan and purpose for our life if we continue to walk in the narrative that he has already set out for us. So hope that's helpful.
That is helpful. That is helpful. And that's spot on to the direction that I want to take this talk. And I'm glad you said a couple of things in there that stood out to me that, you know, even as a Christian, because that's really our audience, you know, and some are and some aren't, but I think some are further along in their journey than others. But even as Christians, right, we can still, if we allow that narrator to redirect what God says about our journey, then we seek that validation. We start clinging to those other things that are temporary, that are fleeting, that really don't define us, but we allow them in. And so that's a great point. Now, talk about some mistakes and fears and failures that might cause that shift, like as we're going through, and you know, if we're seeking validation or we're seeking some of the things that the world tells us are important and that it really aren't eternal, but that we value sometimes based on the narrative that's being thrown at us. What can people do to course correct? What can they do to make those adjustments?
Well, oftentimes if we have veered off course, we need a realignment of our lives. And oftentimes we don't even know that we're drifting. We don't even know that we're veering off the path. And so I would say one of the first things is to continue to stay in community, to have accountability in your life. Like if I have blind spots in my life, or there's areas where I've kind of veered off path, I won't know those things. And I can't, obviously I got myself off the path, but we need help to get us back on the path. And so we weren't meant to go through life alone. We weren't meant to live in silos and on islands by ourselves. We were meant to live in community. We're created for community. And so the enemy would love nothing more than to derail us, to keep us paralyzed with fear, uncertainty, anxiety, have us filled with all those stressors and all those things that would keep us down and out. But oftentimes, and it says in Ecclesiastes, two are better than one. If one falls, he has another person to help him up. So I think that, you know, there is a myriad of reasons of how we get off course and how we start listening and following a different narrative for our life. But oftentimes we don't even know we're listening to a different voice, but someone else who knows us and we're in relationship with, that we'll allow to speak real and hard truth to us. They can help us get back in step, or get back in line, listening to the right voice, right? Also fulfilling the narrative that God has for our life. And so I think the biggest thing is not trying to do this thing alone, and saying, no, I got it. I got myself into this. I'll get myself out of it. No, it's like falling into quicksand. And the more you move and try to do it under your own strength and power, the more you sink. And then pretty soon they'll say, what happened to so-and-so?
Right.
And we don't want to be a casualty in this journey. We want to be one that say, hey, I fell, but you know, by the grace of God, so-and-so helped pick me up. So it comes to a point where we get to a point where we say, you make up in your mind, this isn't where I need to be. This isn't the path I need to walk or choose, the voice I need to listen to. But oftentimes, and I have many stories of how people have walked alongside me and corrected me, even with some tough stuff, or it felt like they punched me in the face, but I needed it. And so they, you know, there's a proverb that says, better are the wounds of a friend than many kisses of the enemy. So I don't need you to patty cake me with a lie. Sometimes I need you to hit me with the truth. And so the narrative, our personal narrative, it's easy to get off course, but we need people to help us get back and stay on course.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And that's a great segue into our next bullet point here of masculinity, because the work you do and let's talk to men for right now, of course. And so you're talking to these young men, you're developing character,
Yeah.
you're in charge of player development. As we go into masculinity, that's another narrative that we could just, we could probably go off on a tangent on, but, I think the world is trying to redefine this word. Maybe the world's trying to reshape it into what makes sense for them, and instead of us kind of sticking to what masculinity truly means, the real masculinity that's out there that we were called to. So talk about some of your work in the lives of these young men and what you really try to hammer home with them from a message about being true men.
Right. Well, I think that, obviously the the lines have gotten blurred and the world has redefined what masculinity looks like. And I think that even sometimes in the church, if it is under our own view of what it looks like, I think we've gotten it wrong too. I think that, it's, one of those things men are just, beat your chest and, all right, I'm going to go get dinner and I'm going to take care of the family. Yes, those are honorable things and biblical things. But I think that along the line of what true masculinity looks like is that, we were always taught real men don't cry,
Right.
wipe your tears. Well, I tell you what, I think that real men do cry. I think real men are we are emotional people. And so I think that just a lot of the different areas of masculinity is the lines have gotten blurred and real men don't do this. Well, hey, I like to say it like this. My dad was both tender and tough.
Yeah.
Okay. A real man is going to hug you when you're hurting. A real man's going to correct you when you're wrong. My father was a perfect balance of someone who was tender, but he was also tough. And I like to say it like this, is that obviously the Bible, makes it very clear, how husbands are to love their wives and not provoke their children to wrath and all those different things. But I think that if you start reducing masculinity down to its most pure form, I think it, just like anything else, it can be reduced down to love. Real masculinity can be paralleled with love. And I always make it a point, even to this day, to make it a point to tell the young men that I serve, I love you and I'm proud of you, because those are two things that they may have never heard a man say to them. But we're created for those things. We are created for love. And so for someone, hopefully they see in a role of leadership, hopefully a man who is genuine and authentic, not perfect, but someone who's genuine and authentic in the calling and that I have for my life, they can say, you know what? I may not have clicked with Mikado and everything that he said and did, but there is one thing that he did do. He told me he loved me and he told me he was proud of me. And also he would look at me in my face and tell me the truth, because I also want to walk in being tender and I want to walk in being tough. I think that true masculinity in a snapshot can be looked at the life of Jesus. He knew when to call out the Pharisees. He knew when he needed to speak sharp to people, but he also knew when he needed to weep with those who were weeping. Forgive those who seemed unforgivable. Right. Or how about this? Be quiet when he didn't need to talk. Think about being on trial or being even on the cross. He didn't say a word. As a sheep before its shearers is silent, even Jesus didn't say a word. And so he is that snapshot of what, to me, true masculinity looks like. And so obviously people have kind of cast that aside and don't want to, that's where the lines have gotten blurred.
I was going to say that's great, because you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but what we're looking at in the social climate that we're in, you said, it's been blurred, and it really has. And you could go down statistic after statistic that shows sort of the collateral damage that occurs from a misguided or misdirected or even absent father figure, right? Or somebody that didn't quite get what the true masculinity meant. And there's all kinds of people who have been, a victim of that sort of household or home. And, when you're talking to your guys and just in general for your experiences, what would you say? I mean, what do you see that guys really struggle with? Because really being a true man to me, like is doing the hard stuff. Like if we got to lean into some of the friction, we got to lean into some of those things that nobody else wants to do. Right. But we have that protector, provider, that just kind of the man figure that we're supposed to be doesn't always get to sit on the couch, when it's too hot outside, as just a metaphor. But talk about some of the ways that you think that maybe has blurred the line. Like what is misguided? What has got us off course as men?
We've gotten away from discipleship. We've gotten away from a lot of the foundational things that help us grow as men. I will say this, Coach Fisher always says this statement. He always says, boys do what they want to do, men do what they have to do. And it sounds like it could be in Proverbs, right?
I like it. Yeah.
But it really does. So I think men they handle the responsibilities and they take ownership of their lives. But if we don't have someone to show us how we do those things, we will always lean towards, I don't want to say the easy way out, but maybe the more convenient way or the less friction type way of how we live our lives. Okay, here's a perfect example. We had Daniel Cormier come speak to the team. Okay. Daniel Cormier, UFC heavyweight champ. He was champ, light heavyweight and heavyweight champ. Well, we had him all set to come speak to the team. And he was fighting his second fight with Stipe Miocic. And I'm watching the fight on a Saturday night. Well, he's scheduled to come speak to our team on a Tuesday. And so watching the fight, well, he's winning the fight. And then all of a sudden things kind of go south. Long story short, he ends up getting knocked out. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh no, I hope he's okay. I hope he still comes and speaks to us on Tuesday. And so long story short, Tuesday, DC was in front of our team. Black eye, still had knots on his head. He showed me in my office, his ankle was still swollen and black and blue. And he says, I don't even know how I did this.
Yeah.
And, but he probably didn't want to be there that night.
That was my next comment. But he probably didn't want to. Yeah.
But he made the commitment that he was going to be there. And Coach Fisher said, boys do what they want to do. Men do what they have to do. And so that just rings so true. He honored his commitment. And also on top of all that, his father was on his deathbed. And so he left us and flew straight to Lafayette, Louisiana, where he's from, and was able to be with his dad for his final couple days. Wow. And so there was just a whole lot of things going on in his life, but he honored the commitment because boys do what they want to do, men do what they have to do. Yeah. And he felt like he had to be there to honor that commitment. So in real masculinity, men honor their commitments. That's that's just one little thing. But one thing that I like to teach the team, if we can go this path, John,
right,
is Pastor Dave Wilson, who pastored a church in Michigan. He was the chaplain for the Detroit Lions for a long time. And my wife and I have been at some marriage conferences that he and his wife, Dave and Ann Wilson, have spoken at. And when we break up with the husbands and the wives and kind of go our separate direction for teaching, he always teaches us this lesson. And I've taught this to a lot of the young men that I'm fortunate to be able to serve and walk alongside. And he uses the acronym REAL. What does a real man look like? And he uses the acronym REAL. R, a real man rejects passivity. A real man isn't passive. A real man doesn't just pass the buck or isn't there to protect. A real man stays true through the end. They're not passive. Not saying they're overly aggressive, but they're not passive. They don't. You think about Adam and Eve. That woman you gave me. He was a passive man, right? So he kind of didn't step up to the plate when he was supposed to step up. So real men aren't passive. Real men reject passivity. E, a real man engages with God. one of the most attractive things, and statistics have been done with the surveys and things. One of the most one of the most, not just impressive, one of the most appealing things and attractive things for a woman about a man is a man who's engaged with God, a man who is running hard with the Lord, a man who is has a personal, intimate relationship with God. They make him the priority of their life. So R, a real man rejects passivity. E, a real man engages with God, has that fruitful, intimate relationship.
Yeah.
And then A, real man accepts responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay. We want to talk about masculinity and what this thing looks like. Well, a real man owns up when they're wrong. A real man accepts responsibility to provide. A real man accepts responsibility when they're wrong. Yeah. Right? Real men say sorry.
Yeah.
Real men say forgive me. Those are lost things in our culture, man.
Right.
Is being able to own up and say, hey, I blew it. I missed the mark. I messed up. Would you please forgive me? Right? We have so many bitter people nowadays, and so many people who are living that lifestyle because they won't forgive someone who hurt them. Right? And they won't let God forgive them.
Yeah.
And so they kind of keeps us trapped or under wraps. And so a real man, A, accepts the responsibility. And then L, a real man leads courageously.
Yes.
It's who we are. It's not just, as John Eldridge talks about in Wild at Heart, the rescuing the damsel in distress and coming riding in on our horse. And here we are to save the day. But a real man leads courageously, and sometimes leadership isn't loud. A real man just consistent, just keeps showing up every single day. Not there to be seen or not there to get the accolades and the trophy, but a real man is just, I know people in my life, John, who've just been consistent leaders in my life, and they don't always talk a lot, but they're just consistent. And so lead courageously. What does that mean? It means we have to lead with courage. Yeah. Sometimes things get tough. Sometimes the road gets dark. Sometimes it gets lonely and things like that. But real men lead courageously, saying, hey, I'm not going to duck out when times get tough. I'm not going to just throw in the towel. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep believing. I'm going to keep leading and things like that. I get knocked down, I'm going to get back up. And so I like to share that acronym as Dave Wilson taught it to me over a couple of different marriage conferences. I guess I needed to hear it 2 and 3 times because I've heard it that many times. But I like to be able to teach that to our young men, because we'll say, you want to know what a snapshot of what a real man looks like? It isn't how many muscles you have. It's not how many receiving yards or touchdowns or sacks or whatever you can get. Those are great things athletically, but you got to hang that helmet up in your locker at some point. And so if you are banking on through your successes and your accolades and things like that to carry you through and who your identity, who you really are, they're going to let you down. At some point, the air is going to be let out of the ball. Yeah. Right. And we're going to have to live our life. Listen, when we go through life struggles and we go through family crisis and things like that, they don't care how many yards you've rushed for. They don't care if you're all SEC and projected first round pick. It rains on everybody. That's right. And so we've got to be able to have a framework, a structure, so to speak, of what it really means to be able to be a real man. And a real man rejects passivity, engages with God, accepts responsibility, and leads courageously. That's simple. Absolutely. It is true, and it will always be true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know that was for a lot of people, that you never heard it put that way. And that's really powerful because it hits all the main factors, right? It hits everything. And so I think that's the thing is you kind of mentioned something about how some of that stuff's fleeting. And when the last second ticks off the clock or the lights go out, then who are we? Or in that morning time in the mirror, who are we? And can we look at that person? And so, those foundational things about getting with God and, rejecting passivity and those kinds of things, I think that's huge. So going into kind of alluding into elevation with some of that, like, some of the ways we've been misguided with masculinity is just depending so much on validation. And that's our barometer. Like that's the gauge we use to determine and measure our manliness or our manhood is,
Yeah.
how many followers we have or how many dollars are in the bank,
Yeah.
those kinds of, and those things are fine. We're not dispelling that those are good, but elevation. So we're
Yeah.
going N.M.E here, the elevation. So elevating ourselves, right? I mean, we all kind of fall into that trap. Um, but talk about maybe some things in your life, maybe where you've had
Yeah.
to look through a different lens because you got a little bit skewed in the way that you were elevating yourself, your accomplishments, what you were dependent upon to feel that, to feel lifted up. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I tell you, if you keep hearing something over and over, you start to begin to believe it, even if it is a lie. And I hear all the time, man, dude, you're in the SEC, you've made it. And I'm like, make it? Like, I didn't know that this was the pinnacle. Maybe in the sporting collegiate athletics world, maybe it is. But, working with people and serving people, man, this is just the garden that God has me planted in. But I have to guard myself from listening to all the praise and all the other things about how good people think I am. Um, what listen, I'm my own worst critic, and I think maybe a lot of people listening, they are as well, but it's a battle now because people reaching out to you, whether it's on social media, telling you how good you bad or how horrible you are. You've got to really fight for the middle and fight to keep that balance
Yeah.
of remembering where our true identity lies. And so you remember when Satan tempted Jesus, he elevated him, he took him up to a mountain and said, everything that you see here, if you just bow down and worship me. And so Satan also will take us to high places. And so we just got to be careful of who we're letting take us there.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when we get to those high places, we think that we did it. We think that it was our smarts or our strength or our whatever, realizing that we're owners of nothing. We're stewards of everything. So it is God who promotes. It is God who elevates. He resists he rejects the proud. He gives grace to the humble and he resists the proud. And so we've got to be able to, one, look at our pride.
Right.
Our pride says, how they get in that, how they get to this position. I'm better than them. You ever play the comparison game?
Sure.
I know I have. Look, let's just operate in transparency. I know that I have. I've heard people speak before and I'm like, ugh, for real? Like, man, I'm more gifted than them. And it's like God will say, hold on now. More gift. If I didn't even give you the strength to open your mouth and put words together,
right,
like you wouldn't be able to do that. And so you better humble down. And so we play the comparison game. I'll be honest, I'm going to get off this podcast and I'm going to say, oh my gosh, I blew it. I should have said this. I didn't say this right. And I'm going to, all the emotions are going to go through my head. I know it. I'm going to try my best to fight against it, but I know it. But I have to be careful about self-elevation.
Yeah.
Because I have to understand that every step that I have taken in my life, I can look back and see God's hand in on that. Now, he may give me choices of what I'm able to do and say, okay, well, do I go left or I go right? And God's saying, just choose. Okay, look, I'm going to be with you wherever you go. So just choose. But oftentimes it's my pride, my arrogance, my ego. You talk about elevate. My dad started off in the grocery business, sacking groceries at Safeway. My dad just retired a couple of years in the grocery business from directing stores. Okay. But it started out sacking groceries and getting carts. But you know what my dad would also do leading up to his retirement? He would still sack groceries and he would still get carts. He was never above any of those things, even though he was now store directors of many different stores in the Kansas City area. But my dad said, I can never get above. I can't ask people to go get carts if I'm not willing to get carts. Exactly. He'd be building the displays on the end caps of the grocery store. Exactly. He'd be facing all the groceries so that his store looked really good. Well, he's the manager. He's like, Mikado, if I'm in my office, I'm not doing my job. I need to be on the floor with the people. My dad had very low turnover in his stores because his employees were happy, because he smelled like the sheep. He was a shepherd leading, but he got in the middle of where the sheep were,
It's
right?
great.
He led them well. And so
Great.
I have to be able to do those same things. So I can try to say I'm sitting here elevated, but if it hasn't been God who's put me in that, now all those other things, the works of the flesh that are found in Galatians 5,
Yeah.
the pride and all those other things, they'll find themselves around me and on me if
Yeah.
I think that I did this. And so
Absolutely.
humility has to be the way.
Yeah.
We have to be able to learn to operate in obscurity.
Right.
When no one is tweeting about you, when no one's putting you on their Instagram story, when no one is writing articles or inviting you to do podcasts and things like
Right.
that, we have to be able to serve in obscurity. Okay, when I was chaplain
Right.
of the Rockets, I wasn't walking around, I'm the chaplain of the Houston Rockets. Any type of success they have, that is because of me. That's elevating myself to a
Yeah.
place that I'm not meant to be. But being able to serve in obscurity and
Yeah.
knowing when the Lord wants to promote or when he wants to elevate, then he'll do it. But
Yeah.
if we try to get ahead of God and put ourselves in positions,
Yeah.
we will be camping out along waters that are too fast for us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we've seen a lot of people fall off that cliff, or we've seen a
Right.
lot of people fall because that elevation, it can only come
Yeah.
from the Lord. And
Absolutely.
he'll usually do that with people who are walking in humility and walking in obedience and walking in fellowship
That's good.
with other people.
Yeah, that's good. And so, yeah, I mean, all of that is just really good stuff, and it hits the elevation perfectly. Now, to close it out, if you can, let's talk about elevating others, because this is really the
Mhm.
calling, right? This is really where the rubber meets the road. This is how we really can say that we are walking in that rhythm that God has
Yep.
created for us as people that love him and then love others, right? So how are we propping
Right.
each other up? Servant leadership is what it's all about. And so if you can just, briefly talk about what people can do. And you talked about humility, and that's a component to really, we gotta really have that in at the recipe to make this thing
Yeah.
work. But the importance of elevating other people and why that's part of our calling as men.
Well, I think it's so vital in our calling as men. Watching other people succeed and not care who gets the credit. I think that's what I've tried my best to give my life to for the last 22 years. Working in FCA, and then now working here at Texas A&M on staff,
Yeah.
is pushing people to be their best, to see the best in them. I think you reduce it down, man. We got to be intentional. We got to be intentional about serving others, not what other people can do for us.
Yeah.
Remember, Jesus came to serve and not to be served,
Yeah.
but yet everyone wanted to serve him, right? And so I think that we've just got to be super intentional about giving our life away. True love is giving.
Right.
Dr. Ed Cole said in his book, Maximized Manhood, that love desires to benefit others at the expense of self,
Mm-hmm.
because love always wants to give and not take.
Mm-hmm.
You look at John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave. Love gives. And so I think that as we're being intentional in helping serve others, that means we're loving others. That means we're pushing others. We're encouraging others. One of the greatest joys of my life is, and it happened a few weeks ago, I took my son to a football camp and I saw a lot of my former athletes who are now coaching. Some who are coaching college, a handful that are in college, but a lot, I'd say there were maybe 15 or so that are coaching high school ball. And a couple of them came up to me, and this, I don't need this, but I'll tell you what, God knew I needed it. And one of the guys came up and said, "Hey, I've never thanked you." And I'm like, "For what?" He said, "You may not have thought I was listening to you, but man, I watched you and I was listening to you. And now here I am coaching and I'm a husband, and I'm a dad, and I've never had the chance, or I've never taken the opportunity to tell you thank you.
Yeah.
And, I think God knew pride, I didn't need to hear that, but I needed to hear that.
That's good.
It's always good every now and then when someone comes alongside to remind you. It was almost like I heard God saying, keep going.
Yeah. But
Keep going, keep serving.
actually, that's why you're doing it, to see the picture of that, not necessarily to hear about it. It's to see it, like to see
That's
guys
right.
have a life now, and they were listening, and they have families. They are men who are husbands leading courageously. You didn't need to hear it, but you do it because you want to see that. And that's the end goal, right? That's good.
Yeah. And here I am. I'm saying I didn't need to hear it. Maybe that is the great oxymoron of life, prideful humility.
Sure.
Maybe it was my pride sprinkled in with some humility, but pride takes over, saying,
sure.
But I did need to hear that, especially that day, And so I think being intentional, serving others, how do we elevate? How do we put ourselves in position for God to elevate us?
Sure.
I think it is by staying low, by staying in the shadows, by walking serving in obscurity.
Yeah.
Right. All those things.
Yeah.
Because when God sees you faithful there, then he will promote you. A lot of people want to get dropped off onto the mountaintop.
Sure.
And I'm telling you, it doesn't develop the muscles necessary to endure the long haul. So we got to make that climb. We got to be able to stand in spaces where there's no cameras and there's no, hey, y'all, look at me, and turn around and do all this stuff. But we got to be able to serve, when people say amen, when they don't, when they clap, when they don't. We have to be able to serve in all those spaces, because true elevation only comes from God.
You're hitting the nail on the head, and you're spot on with that. And that, in fact, it's our foundational scripture here, like last in line leadership, right? I mean, it says it all.
Yeah.
It's to be first. You've got to be last of all and servant of all.
That's right.
And that's the words of Jesus. And so we're trying to be examples of that. And man, you've spent a career doing that, and you get to see there's nothing wrong with hearing, hey man, well done, good and faithful servant, right? And indirectly from those people, God's speaking to you with his affirmation through other people. And I think there's nothing wrong at all with that. But I appreciate you being on here. I know we've had some technical challenges this morning, and it seems like somebody or something didn't want this to happen, but we made it happen, and God was gracious enough to bring us on. And man, you just poured out just gold wisdom for this audience and for me. And it's been a blessing to have you. Audience, I hope you got plenty of notes, and I hope we're going to have to rewatch this again because there's so much good in there. But remember the REAL for being a real man. Remember those things about the false narratives that we can buy into, and get back to baseline and know what God says about you and what story he's telling, and grab onto that. And then finally elevating others. God will elevate you. So you know what? I'm blessed to be connected with you, blessed to have you on today. And with that, audience, he's been Mikado Hinson. We've been Last in Line. Be blessed.